So, actually I have a fairly large amount of stuff that on the list of things to talk about. So, I guess I'll just start. If the Gavi document now should have a list of points there. No, are you getting there? Okay. So I'll just start. So the first thing we were wanting to do this session, that there's really not a lot of discussion required, but let people know that we're hoping to we're expecting that for the NATI cycle we will have cluster compute images on EC2, which that was a big feature Amazon added. They're basically very large images, or very large cluster compute size nodes, and we want to be able to launch Ubuntu there. The difference versus their normal ones is that they use Zen HVM mode rather than Pervert, and right now our images would not function there. So our goal is to have NATI images on cluster compute instance types.
Do you know what's the underlying cluster technology there?
It's Zen, but it's Zen HVM, and the big thing.
Zen HVM is virtualization, it's not cluster.
Right. There's no cluster technology. It's just
right.
The size of the.
Okay. So they just group the machine and call it cluster. There is no cluster high availability technology.
It's got they have 10 gig connectivity to other instances in your node and some other nice.
So they have massive spec and high I/O.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah.
So is that something that the kernel team would do, or?
John, is the work that really needs to be, there's two sets of work that needs to be done there, and basically may have to create some new images somehow, or have to modify the publication process to get the data there.
Yeah.
And then John has some work to do that he can.
So we need to pull in the PV on HVM drivers to our kernel, and there's just a little bit of work to be done there. We're hoping actually that PV and HVM drivers will land upstream for NATI. We'll see if that happens. They have been at times in the next tree, so we're not sure where they're going to be at in the time frame for NATI. We'll either have to pull them in, or and it'll have to go on a regular kernel, because we're not running Pervert on the cluster compute clouds.
Yeah.
They don't
The HVM device driver model. That's important. Because I thought HVM was exposing basically the device driver.
Right. It's not QEMU per se, because we're talking Zen.
Yeah, but Zen calls HVM, which uses the device of QEMU. I mean, the cards that you get.
It depends what they're presenting.
Okay.
They can be presenting fake devices to us. They can be presenting real hardware.
Sure.
And they want, for performance reasons, they want to go through the PV on HVM drivers.
Okay.
They are para-virtualized drivers on top of the regular HVM. But
Understood.
for performance reasons, that's what they've set it up as and want.
That's the driver that we can download from kvm.org. Basically, that's the one you're talking. You hope will be upstream there. So.
It's actually PV on HVMs are from Zen.
From Zen direct.
Zen source.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so that's one of the things that we want to do. Yeah, Gabi seems to be bouncing again. The second thing on the list that I put in there was this OVF format. I guess our primary interest right now in OVF would be to get support for VMware's vApp, which is their cloud. Or I'm not terribly familiar with VMware's products, but basically they have something that will consume a OVF file and kind of make it, and they have an image store that reads data from those and would allow people to easily install our images if we were to make them available in an OVF. So that would get us into a easily discoverable and usable by users of VMware.
OpenStack is for OVF.
So
So how many different formats would we publish the images into?
Yeah, that's
Does it make sense to actually standardize on only one format?
is what we make available. I mean, we
On UEC-images.ubuntu.com, there's like a toggle, then an expanded
well,
files, and then we also would publish ODF.
yeah. I mean, there's really no value in the expanded files other than the UEC image store, but so that's of little value. But the tarball file, I guess that is a reasonable. We could replace that possibly with the OVF and change UEC published tarball to consume the OVF, and then we need some transfer. That would be reasonable.
Is there any OVF support right now in the tools in Ubuntu? Like, do we need to package new libraries or?
So the things that we need to do, it's not really a big deal. We basically need to write a manifest file that contains some metadata, which is, it's XML, but it's just, you know, it would very easily be written one time as a template and then filled in, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to change for us. So we don't need really tools to drive the creation of that. The one thing that we would need to do is in Cloud Init be able to support reading the metadata rather than from the EC2 metadata service or from a file that be able to read it from the OVF ISO transport.
Is that what a case of adding like a file colon// attribute rather than HTTP or something?
It would be similar. I mean, the OVF, so right now, Cloud Init supports reading from a file on disk. It'll look in a given directory right now, and if it sees files that are named user data and metadata, it assumes that those are what you wanted, and then it won't even hit the EC2 metadata service. But what we'll do is we'll need to add another one that will look and see if there's an attached CD-ROM. We'll look, and if it has a file called the OVF ISO transport is is standard. It'll have to look in there, and then it'll pull its metadata from inside of that, or at least a reference to another place where metadata would be.
Okay, is someone making a note of that?
It's listed in there as
Okay.
data source in Cloud Init.
Yeah, I'm trying to connect there, but is the fact that conversion on one format from
No,
publishing
so-
is captured, or?
No, if you could, I didn't really think about dropping the .tar.gz file. Seriously. Golly, just dropped. Typo. So yeah, if you could make a comment of possibly remove the .tar.gz files and replace them entirely with .ovf, that would require us to backport tools to stable releases.
So there's also an impact on LTSs.
Well, the idea is, yeah, I mean, we'd like to be able to deliver natty images to a LTS.
Right, so it's not actually a good idea to drop RGZ.
Not without stable release updates and backend magic, and yeah, it would be hard, but
And we already have the code there, so it's just adding another format.
yeah.
I think that's probably easier for Natty just to add OVF, and then we can revisit later if we want to drop RGZ.
Okay, so I guess I'll go down to the next item on the board, which is any work to support OpenStack. You know that the Maverick images run in OpenStack and hit the OpenStack EC2 metadata service functions. Also in Cloud Init, I added support there basically for such that it could read data from files inside the image. And my understanding is that Rackspace allows insertion of arbitrary files into a file system. So I haven't tested it, but the user should be able to insert given files and then basically precede Cloud Init as a metadata service that way.
Is there any work needed during the 90 seconds to fully support that, or is it?
It's supposed to work right now. I haven't tested it. Yeah. So I mean, I've tested the file support. I've never walked all the way through like a Rackspace install and preceding that way. I'm not just drawn that way. But for OpenStack, as it is, it just works because they provide the EC2 metadata service.
We can take like 20 minutes at some point to see if it works.
Sorry, can you talk up?
We can take like 20 minutes at some point, just sit down, the two of us, and
As a Rackspace instance rather than OpenStack.
yeah, Rackspace, yeah.
Yeah, and I want to do that also, so I don't know, maybe that's something we should try. But yeah, I would like to have our images, including Cloud and it, on Rackspace as an option for people to launch. So, the next discussion point there is pre-seed installer. This is something Nick Marcet brought up. Nick? It's not here.
It's in the start session.
Okay, so this is something he brought up. Is we've basically got got a mechanism for bootstrapping a generic install in Cloud Init and Cloud Config, and Nick thought it might be useful if we could seed Cloud Init via a Debian pre-seed, so that you could install real hardware or a guest virtualization the way you normally do, and then on the first boot the instance would come up and have data that said what it should turn itself into. Basically extending the pre-seed so that Cloud Init could read from it.
Plus.
What's the actual use case and how is that?
The use case is to integrate in already pre-seed environments where people already have all preset installed. It's probably like this, so you can hook it into it.
Pre-seed are used by DI,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah, but
clouds-
people have pre-seed servers, pre-seed files already.
Yeah, I still don't see the use case for Cloud Init to support pre-seeds because Cloud Init will be run after your DI has done the installation. So the pre-seed is already consumed by DI.
So
Yeah, but as far as I understand, pre-seed is not always going to
The
be
goal-
off. So
the goal would be to add a pre-seed value to DI so that it knew when it saw a given
Right.
installer option, oh, that means I dropped some files in varlib cloud, that when Cloud Init comes up, it will recognize, oh, these are my metadata files, and take off on its own.
But for example, one use case would be if your Init comes and install a GRE suddenly and an application on top. You will want to pre-accept licenses and stuff like that, and adding that in pre-seed. I mean, as far as I understand, pre-seed is helpful at deployment, but it's helpful for any application basically you want to install without, providing auto-answers.
Does that conflict with the Puppet with bootstrapping ends?
Not necessarily, but so to go back to, so what kind of option would you precede in Cloud Init? So if I understand correct, to rephrase what you just said, you want to have the Cloud Init package that supports some precede templates, right?
The Cloud Init package would, well, the Debian installer would need, as I might be misunderstanding something, but the Debian installer would come up, read preceded values for it. One of them would be something like Cloud Init metadata something, right? And then when it saw that, it would know to write that into varlib cloud user data, varlib cloud metadata, and then when Cloud Init comes up, it just says, oh, my data is written. I know that's the metadata I'm supposed to respond to. So Cloud Init doesn't really need anything. The Debian installer would just, or the Ubuntu installer would just need to write those files based on given that pre-seed by the user. And then you just bootstrap that way. It allows you to take advantage of stuff we're doing elsewhere in your environment. So I can't imagine it's really all that much work in the installer to recognize a new key and write a file.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not. I don't think it's very complicated to do. I'm just not sure that we actually have real use cases. So I understand the generic framework you want to provide, but
yeah,
what Cloud Init would be used for? So right now, Cloud Init, for example, is able to pull metadata information for ephemeral volumes, right? And UDS root, things like that. where do you want to mount your EDS volumes. That's one
Cloud
specific.
config does that.
Yeah,
Yes.
cloud config. So is there actually a use case for doing that after DI is installed? You can already do that in DI. I don't
Yeah.
see the added value of.
Well, so via user data, you can do, you can on first boot inject a upstart script, or on first boot run a boot hook that runs very early in that first boot, or take advantage of the stuff that's in cloud config to puppetize your image. You could, if you had that already functional on your EC2 or something, and you had the Debian installer, then it just makes a common point that you can do this one way or another.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was brought up by Nick. I think the only reason I would think to not do it is if if it should be easy to do, but I don't want to just pollute the installer. I agree.
Yeah. I would really try to nail down the exact use case you want to try to cover that, because we can probably do it in DI itself. So I'm like,
but no.
It's another way to do it. But
you can't do it. You can't do all the things that Cloud Init can do in DI. I mean, and I would think that people are not interested in that sort of functionality going into DI. I mean, I guess you can. I guess you could, because you have a PostScript, a post install script,
Link
right?
one.
To where you can do whatever the hell you want in DI. But but the reason you would want to do it via Cloud Init or Cloud Config is because you were already doing that, or you had other systems that were utilizing something you'd spent resources on that.
Right, yeah, fair. I'm just exploring. So is there any use cases of things that you would do with Cloud Init that you also want to do with real hardware? It seems like Cloud Init is really focused on you're running into a cloud, so you're going to have access to the user metadata and things like that. So it's very cloud friendly. And
it's generic bootstrap code in a lot of ways, and it takes a data source and reacts to it. I mean, that's kind of the goal, but yeah. So I guess if somebody can take notes, say, kind of nail down use case, and maybe Boris could help there, but on exactly what we'd want to do, and if there's actually an interest in that, then we could, to make sure there would be a use for adding something to the installer.
yeah, I just fear that it's just a really cool idea, but is it really useful? Does it really bring value? I'm not sure about that.
No. I mean, that's something we can come back with some propositions.
And obviously Nick is the one who brought this up, so hopefully Nick could contribute also.
You will have
So add inbar set next to Boris, whoever's writing that.
You don't have a generic first boot type service that do.
No.
No.
That's what the metadata is supposed to do.
Yeah, that's what that's the use case. Whether it's using public.
All right, then.
Better landing page for UC images.
Yeah.
That's the next one.
Yeah, so there have been multiple times when I've wanted to give a link to, talk about UEC images and wanted to give a generic link, and basically there's uecimages.ubuntu.com, and that gives you a nice Apache listing of files, and it's really nice. So very professional. I'd like to have some landing page somewhere, and maybe this is work that, I don't know, is Ahmed here?
No, Ahmed couldn't come.
But he's not here, but is he?
Oh, he's listening, yeah.
Maybe I would try to throw that way, and that would tie into the cloud, cloud.ubuntu.com, but I'd like to have basically reasonable documentation and links to the images, and a getting started page that I could just reference as this is where you get information about UEC images.
So, do you have a list of information you want to get included there? Just for brainstorming so that we can get started.
Well, I'd like to ideally, I think I put something there. Ideally, I'd like to have it dynamically list AMIs and latest links for downloads. So it'd be very, if the users want to download something, they can click on it. Have links to information on how to run them in KVM. It's basically general documentation about about our images, about how you can use them. And there's not a lot of documentation on that in general. It's called.
So, general documentation about image users, such as cloud inits documentation, or link to the cloud init documentation, cloud init samples.
Yeah. Running on KVM, or if we had OVF support, you know, how do you run this on VMware, or how do you run this on VirtualBox? How do you rebundle these things, which is a different topic. But yeah, basically I need a lot of documentation written and fleshed out for those. And I'd like a general landing page for it.
Okay.
So that would be something that I think that lots of people could contribute to. Hopefully we could get some buy-in from people and to help to make that better. I'd really appreciate help on that.
The cloud portal from that could.
That's right, yeah. The cloud portal could be, I mean, could at least provide the landing page there. I mean, definitely.
Yeah.
I would hope that it would.
If the cloud images are prominently exposed.
Right. Yeah, so I go to the next. I don't know, the grub fallback kernel is something I've been kind of wanting to do. If you've ever booted it, if you've ever rebooted an instance you have remote connectivity to, kind of cross your fingers and hope it comes up. Grub has reasonable fallback support in both 2 and 1, that if it failed to boot, and we can issue, you know, the EC2 API allows you to reboot an instance. If it didn't come up all the way, I've tested it generally functional, that it could fail to come up. I could then say reboot remotely, and it would come back up into a fallback kernel. Right now, neither our grub 1 or grub 2 write fallback information, but I'd like to get that there, just so that if your instance doesn't come up, you can go back into a known good kernel. And what I would do that I think would be questionable is I mentioned it on the board there, is basically like to the dist kernel that we put in there, to just always have that there. And even though it's got possibly security issues and it's old, it did boot. And
So I think we're already doing something similar on the desktop, where you will record last time the kernel was successfully booted.
okay.
And so, do you want to provide a similar user experience than what we're currently doing for the desktop, or?
Well, there's no user experience basically, because it's all.
Well, there is. We can define a user experience for EC2. It's just that there's no interaction, but we can still think about what's going to happen.
Yeah. Basically, yeah. The goal is if the system doesn't come up, and Grub detected that it didn't come up, the next time Grub comes up, it should say I'm falling back. Yeah. So if I didn't realize that was in desktop.
I think so.
As it is.
I don't know if.
Rotate?
Well, because last time when I do kernel upgrades on the laptop and for some reason it doesn't work, it comes back to the other one. There was some.
It falls back to the last previously known kernel.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
So we already have the code and
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about
For in Grub, then it's probably would. Do we have that on the server?
Good question.
Generically, that's something that should also be on the server.
Yes.
we might have discovered
It's probably in Grub. It's probably.
We've got Grub 2 on the server, so I don't see no reason
Yeah,
why
it's
this
probably
wouldn't
just the
work.
normal
It did
stuff,
exactly
right.
the same.
So then the work that I would have to do is on EC2, the bootloader is Grub 0.97, and it's managed by kind of a fork of the Grub 0.97 code that I have that basically writes a menu.list and manages it. So I'd have to add the fallback code to that.
Dynamically write menu.list when it falls back, basically. Yeah.
Right. Well, Yeah, there's supporting grub. Basically, just have a fallback section, and I would just basically always write that, and that would always be there. And then I'd have to make sure that those original kernels never got deleted.
And sorry, I mean, I don't want to make subject, maybe it's not the right area, but PI grub as well, because if we speak about HVM, and we're going to have a para-virtualized console, and you need then a special version of grub to work on that. I mean, it's usually called PI grub, it was a Python version, basically.
Oh no, it's so EC2. The way that we reboot our kernels on EC2, we can service our own kernels in Maverick, and it uses PV grub, Paravert grub.
PV grub.
Yes.
Thank you.
But there was a PyGrub, but PV
It was a
grub is
PyGrub,
better.
it was before.
PV grub is actually grub. It's,
Yeah, sorry.
much nicer.
Disconnected at the time.
Functions. So. And then the next feature is much more kind of pie in the sky, but today I booted my the first natty builds went up to EC2, and when they boot, the RAM disk, well, the kernel and the RAM disk come up and they say can't mount root device, and you're SOL because no SSH server. So right, because we didn't get up, yeah, because we're dead. I would like for the RAM disk I would like to provide some mechanism in that situation, in that failed mount situation, that the user could get into the instance and fix it.
So it's a small rescue, basically, environment. So I mean,
yeah,
mounting a root even in RAM disk and providing a big shell.
Yeah, basically. Well, yeah, and like, you know, in your normal desktop boot, it would fail and say can't mount root, and I think in some cases drop you into a shell, right?
So yeah, if, I mean, in our story, in our story, it wouldn't work like this. But if you do what you're talking about, I think what's interesting is to hook a shell then, and we can very quickly make a RAM disk with the available RAM, even of 100 meg, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And just install a very small rescue environment in there, and profiles, etc.
Right.
Shell.
And SSH and
SSHD, sorry.
is the thing that I need to get in there. So that's what all this is questionable about, is I want to stuff an SSH daemon into a RAM disk.
Well, I think that's possible. I mean, drop
Yeah,
bear.
It's
Drop bear's current universe.
well, it's more a...
The main problem I see is that you need to bring network in the init RAM disk. And that's the last time we discussed that was the main issue.
It functions. I've done that.
I think we still have the problem that the network is not initialized and it's in user end. So when you're going to put it, you're not going to have.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I just did a very quick look, and someone's got a how-to on how to do SSH Lux via SSH. So when you have your reboot server in RAM FS, you can SSH and unlock it.
Yeah.
And that's just you've been
That's
doing
what
a
we need.
subset of that, and that seems very possible.
Yeah, I wouldn't need...
But there's something as well to consider. I mean, just consider there's SSHD, but there's as well a lot of other options to provide SSH functionality. Sometimes in embedded system, much little. I can't remember the name, LSHD or something like this.
Well, drop bear is the...
Drop there as well. That.
But there's
Drop
really
SSH.
no...
I mean, that's just because it's tiniest. I'm not.
If it's there and it's available, but I have no distance. I don't care about the size of my RAM disk, other than it possibly booting slower.
Yeah, but because it's in RAM, I'm just thinking that I would not
Right,
limit it
because
with
the init RAM
that.
disk will be cloud specific.
Exactly.
Right.
Over the last few releases, there was a big push from Foundation to get the size of their initial RAM disk
Low.
smaller
Yes.
for good reasons.
Right.
So if
But be
that's
careful.
something that we need to consider.
But we had a lot of
So-
trip on this because, for example, we removed the HBA drivers, so we couldn't initialize SANs and things like that as well. So they've been put back into the server init RAM disk. But I agree with you, it was a few bugs. When
It's also, but for the images in particular, it's...
It doesn't really.
Well, I can write into Etsy init, Etsy init RAM disk.d or whatever it is, the configuration that is read by mkinitRD. And so I can write ahead of those, and then it's only specific to these images. And when
You have decent DHCP in AWS, don't you?
yeah, there's required to be a DHCP certificate. So I have registered in EC2 a RAM disk that will come up and it will read user data from user data and act on it if it
Nice.
sees special stuff. So it is all possible. It's not anything special.
So now I have a more generic question, which is, what is the actual use case for that? Who would use that?
Who would use the failed root?
The SSH server, the functionality we're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Who would use that? Is like it's a developer tool for you to actually fix the images?
No.
I think it's people who run the
Or-
machine in prod that, for example, make
Yeah.
a mistake with security group or forget to open it.
No, I disagree, because you've just boot the machine up. It's just easier just to terminate it and start it again, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, so in
Depends on
the
the
case that I came in today, well, I would have liked to have been able to debug to it, but you've got an instance running, especially if it's an instance store instance, that's where it actually has real value. Because
Yeah.
the EBS, you could just shut the thing down, detach the volume, go over and poke at it from there. It's still a lot slower than possibly just rebooting and fixing something, and running FSCK. But basically, you did a reboot and your system came up and it says can't mount root. And
right,
you
so
reboot
you
again.
reboot because you have a new kernel that we published.
Right, or you reboot because a bunch of stuff went wrong and you wanted to reboot. For whatever reason, you rebooted, it didn't come back up cleanly. It happens. Not just
Okay.
on EC2,
Oh,
but
yeah.
in real life.
I agree. I'm just trying to figure out who would
Yeah.
actually use that, and I understand that as
Yeah.
you, the developer, it's something that is
Oh, right,
important,
right.
and
No.
it makes sense.
The goal would be to, if a user of EC2 comes to the case where their instance is unbootable, which lots of times people write, on the EC2 forums and on the EC2 Ubuntu, hey, I'm locked out of my image, what can I do?
Yeah,
And the answer is really nothing.
pretty much.
Screwed.
Restart the instance. Yeah.
Start doing it since
And
your
hope for the
data's
best.
gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it would be nice if, and then so the other thing is somehow it would be great if you could manually trigger this, not only on a mount. Yeah, that's more questionable. I don't even know. I would like to hear ideas on how you could do that. But
So
it's one
specifically
thing.
force that to happen.
Yeah, because it's one thing how failed root's easy to detect.
Sure.
Yeah.
If Unit Ramfest has the ability to pick up the networking details and look at the user data, could you not just inject something?
You can't. So you can't really change user data. The only way you can actually do that is Cloud Init allows for it is you have an include to another thing that you can change.
Oh, sorry.
It's an include
You're
with
talking
multi
about
line.
units, you're talking about an existing running instance.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
multi-part as well. So.
So yeah, you can do it in Cloud Init, but then I'd have to add that into the S. The danger there is I don't want the RAM disk necessarily to always bring up the network. And
Right.
why would I always do that? But then there's no other way to tell it to do that other than
Yeah.
so.
It's a tricky situation. Maybe there's another switch we can have to actually entering. I mean, auto detecting is fantastic, but maybe we can have a switch as well somewhere that can actually move directly to that environment too.
Is Ben listening? Ben Howard, are you there?
So this SSH server console only failed to launch what is specific to EC2, right?
Well, it would also be UC, and basically the our init RAM disks for cloud images would have some special, would have an SSH server built in or some way that the user could get in and fix this. And I can't think of a way to force it if you're locked out for another reason, but I would really love to have that. That would be much more functional. So those are the things I had. I know there's people listening and we have some time left. I think, what do we have, 8 minutes or more?
18.
80
Okay.
minutes.
Great. So there's people here and there's people in IRC, and I would love to hear ideas or any other brainstorming
Yes.
thoughts.
Logging. Well, we're going to might talk about that, but central logging. So that when you boot your images, you can say log to that syslog server. So that you know what's going on.
Or central remote logging of the logs. I mean, automating it.
Yeah, so you boot your image and you want to know right from the start or as soon as you can what's going on there.
Right.
So Cloud Init and Maverick gain the ability to, it uses Python logging, and Python logging supports writing to syslog, and then syslog out to, Python logging supports writing to a remote syslog. And Cloud Init supports reading that syslog configuration from, reading that Python logging configuration from Cloud Config. The thing you can't do is that initial Cloud Init that runs, if it's not in the file system, you know, that syslog stuff has to be hard-coded onto the file system because it has nowhere else to get it from.
Right.
Before it reads user data, and then it reacts to the user data, but the first time up, it's got nothing. Although you can even see that if you wrote it in the file system, right? Your subsequent reboots would get it and stuff. So that's kind of there.
Oh yeah, I agree that we can do it. I was just suggesting that we actually provide an option to really make it even easier, where there's a specific cloud init support that says reboot syslog server, and then you have the IP address, and then you don't need to do anything like that, and then automatically you get cloud init that is configured to do.
So it's basically there. I mean, other than saying remote syslog server, you provide the Python logging. There's a have you looked at Python logging's configuration syntax? I mean, so basically you just tell it, but you have to tell it through Python logging configuration syntax. But it's the same thing.
Is that user friendly? The Python logging syntax?
It's an init style. Init
style, yeah. I mean, it's something. It's documented. It was like
it does
I thought about, you know, I could have invented something else, or this was already working, and I was like, it would be better documented than what I have.
Do you mean in CloudNet in general, just to get the CloudNet logs, or do you mean for
the system logs?
CloudNet script to bootstrap?
System logs.
Yeah, system logs. So it's good that you use.
I don't have in general remote.
Yeah, so basically
I don't write syslog.
Yeah, you change the syslog, the rsyslog configuration on the images, so that they can log to a remote syslog server.
So what you're talking about is having an syslog or just syslog argument into the cloud config.
Yes.
That automatically will those things. I think that would be a fantastic improvement actually.
Okay. Yeah, you're right.
No, honestly, that's really something that people, especially since we suppress a bit of the log message.
Yeah, general syslog, not just cloud config. Yes.
Yeah, that's very good.
Suggested one feature.
I can't see from here.
So, Eric, I think you're asking to see like I don't know how much experience with 10.10 you have, Eric, but there's 10.10 varlog cloud init.log contains all of the Python logging output. And if you configure Python logging, you can bump that up to something that would write all of those messages to the console. I don't know if that would be sufficient for what you're asking.
Would it make sense to do that by default? So people have the ability to get the console out.
I think what would be very nice is to have that article of the cloud config of whatever has happened during that configuration to be dropped as a text file, the logging somewhere in the file system, a bit like similar what the installer does. Do you know what I mean? I think it's great because effectively what you do in cloud config, you see it only after. You don't have a trace or anything that tells you this is what's been done when the instance has booted.
So I'm missing something.
So just coming back on what Eric said, basically.
Is echo output of for like the user data?
Yes.
I think in Maverick and Lucid, user data does not go to the console.
Right.
But
well, it seems that the use case for me is really about debugging an instance.
Absolutely, yeah.
So another solution would be set a debug option, and when you have debug option, then you have verbose logging on the console, and then given that you're using logging for the Python logging module, then you can easily configure set Cloud Init to set itself up for that different logging configuration.
right, the output of user scripts do not go to the console. They did in Karmic, and the cloud init stuff, like the apt package installs, do go to the console, which I think is kind of yucky.
No, it doesn't look good. That's not that. So can we redirect that instead of dropping to the console? Can we redirect that to a text file and drop that?
Eric wants it on the console.
Oh, sorry, forget about that. So no.
But the user data scripts can. The reason that I didn't, by default, the user data scripts don't go to console output because it's so very easy in any programming language to direct output to wherever you want, and doing it to dev console. If you just redirect the output of a shell script to dev console, it'll go to the console.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And so I just thought the default should not be that.
I definitely think the people who want to debug it, I mean, console fair, but even dropping in on a text file saying this is what has been done during cloud config, cloud init user file.
Okay.
That should be great.
Eric's suggesting that if the output was always, if the default output was to a file, then that would be sufficient. I think that would probably be useful.
Right. Yeah, no, I think I agree with that.
Yeah, so can somebody write that down as, put the, by default, user scripts should, yeah, right now it goes to var log cloud init.log, the log messages do, but like user output doesn't go there. I'm not actually sure where user output ends up going.
So maybe we could drop it somewhere, I don't know.
But I think but var log user data output.log or something would be fine.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good idea. Some of these things, there also is for anyone interested, there is a cloud init and cloud config session where really this stuff should have fallen. The idea of this session was really the images in general. No, I mean, I went into it.
Slightly out of subject.
The idea was the images in general for here, and then the separate session that's on Friday morning for that.
Maybe, should we discuss maybe the sizing of the image? I know that with the latest UBS route and 10, 15 gig story, there's some interesting discussion around that, but maybe that's not this discussion I'm not sure.
An hour.
It's, I don't know. I think you made the calculus is like 50 cents a month.
Yeah.
The problem,
Yeah, so this is,
I don't think we should spend these hours trying to fix a 50 cents a month.
No, but I was thinking more about the ability for us to change the default sizing of our images and to adapt to different platforms. Because again, I mean, apparently I've read the last part of Scott on that subject, which is clear, not clear for me, who says that maybe it's easy, maybe it's not so easy to move from a 15 gig to a 10 gig image. Of course, there's less space. But we shouldn't expect on cloud infrastructure people to use actually the space of the OS to do their stuff. They should mount EBS, they should have an OS3 buckets,
so
they should, you know what I mean?
For anybody unaware, the discussion here is that EC2 made Amazon recently announced the EC2 free usage tier. And basically, if you sign up for a new EC2 account, you can run a T1 micro instance for a year and for free. It's 24/7 for free. It's really quite awesome.
Yeah, right.
The
catch.
The catch is that both Ubuntu images and Amazon Linux AMIs are 15 gig root volume, and you're only given 10 gig root volume.
So they make you pay for
So
storage out of the
basically,
box.
you're going to end up being charged for 5 gigabytes of provisioned storage per month,
Just
which is 50 cents. So it seems to me that it's an oversight at Amazon. I wrote an email today to some people at Amazon and said, hey, could you maybe bump this up? Because it just seems to me that users are not they're going to end up with bad press out of it, and
Absolutely.
at the value of gaining $6 in a year.
I completely agree. No, I was thinking more about, so the discussion I was thinking about is, I mean, what is the process of us to changing that default?
So,
yeah.
So the current size is 15 gig, right?
Yeah.
Why was 15 gig?
I don't know.
Because Eric Hammond picked 15 gigs.
All right,
No, but the reason 15.
Let's do it 14.
There's no real good reason that it should be 15 gig. The only, and I don't have a problem potentially moving that in Natty to 10 gig. The thing that Eric, I'm really not interested in producing, 8 more AMIs that are 10 gig rather than 15 gig, and doing that for Lucid and doing that for Maverick.
There's no way to have dynamic sizing? I mean, I know it's
Well, you can size up. easily.
Right, yeah, of course.
Because the file system's there, and you can say, give me a 20 gig, and then you can resize up, but you can't go down. And the resize up is actually very fast. I mean, if you do a E2 resize, you can do it on a live mounted volume. It goes from...
On live as well?
Yeah.
That's the same as external.
On your first
resize.
boot, if you do it like on the first boot, it's like sub-second. So having a 10 gig and saying, well, if you want to go to 15, then go to 15. That's quite reasonable.
How about having 5 gig?
Exactly. I'm thinking, so then we can cater for even people who will provide, who knows, maybe some smaller. I mean, 5 gig is enough to have an OS and a little bit of space, isn't it?
I'm thinking from the server perspective, we're trying to be lean and we're trying to have a small install footprint. So how about applying exactly the same principles to the UEC images?
Completely agree.
As you mentioned, it's easy to size up.
So the reason you don't, there's not been any real interest in anything other than, it costs $1.50 a month to have a 15 gig, right? And so a 5 gig is going to cost you 50 cents a month. So you have $1 savings, right, to the user at a cost of 10 gig of root file system. So it's, prior to there being T1 Micro, the cheapest thing you were going to run on EC2 cost you $70 a month. So a dollar.
I'm saying, I agree with you that, but I think it's for the principle of having something completely free and having people ending with a bill. And if they run Ubuntu out of it, we might have as well.
So
I wouldn't want people to focus into Ubuntu image.
Yes. So for Natty, I'm all for. I don't see a real value in making it 5 gig versus 10. I mean, this arbitrary number that Amazon chose at 10 is why I have an interest in 10.
Right.
But.
Well, my interest is to try to get the smallest possible image.
I agree.
As this is what we're trying to follow for server as well.
I fully agree. I mean, for the download size, because it's easy to extend, and the fact that as well, what do you know, maybe next week Amazon will come with a 9 gig, and we just, oh no.
Well, I think that's to follow up.
The download size is no bigger or smaller.
But for UEC, we still need to transfer all the images.
The downloads are no bigger or smaller.
No, but all right. From EC, when you're going to launch an instance, you're still going to need.
It's a file system, but we use sparse tar. So that would be one reason to not move to only OVF. We use sparse tar format. So I mean, tar just says those are zeros.
Right.
There happens to be 10 gig of them.
Yeah, but when this is over the 4 minutes. Okay, but just to come back on this, the problem that I see with this is if you say to the user, you're going to so sorry, I'm trying to piece things together there. So we're saying that image is going to be the smallest or not. You compress it using tar sparse, but in UEC itself, it's actually in the Amazon format. And in UEC, what you're going to do is, if it's 10 or 15 gig, you're going to have actually to send that in copy to the S3 bucket, to the local cache of the node controller, volume eucalyptus bucket. Yeah? So
the UEC images are right now, their root file system is 2 gigabytes. And what you download, that's a 2 gig.
Right.
And it's 560 meg populated.
Okay, so it's irrelevant to EC2. Definitely.
Yeah, and then what you can do is with the UEC publish tarball and UEC publish image, there's a resize option. So if you want to go up from 2 gig to 10 or 15, you can do that.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
So the option is to do the 10 gig for Natty and push Amazon to support 15 gigs so that the Maverick and
they just run.
So does anybody think that we should do it, that Natty root, EBS root should be 10 gig?
I still think, like along the line of Matthias, I think we should do it the smallest possible because it's easy to extend and because you don't want to be recoating these kind of things. Like, who knows, you know?
I mean, there doesn't seem a need. I mean, 10 gig is actually quite large.
It's huge.
Yeah. Right. So Eric, I didn't see.
Yeah, +1.
He thinks you're doing it right.
He's supportive of what I...
Oh, +1 reduced, okay. So I think that then, that we should just put in a 10 gig and make it, and then I would say another to do then, I have cloud config with an option to resize the root file system up.
Oh, now that's me.
But I won't turn it on by default, although it would be.
No, but
although I don't. Does anybody think of a reason why you wouldn't, if you provisioned a root? If you told you said boot this, but I want 30 gig rather than 10, that you wouldn't want that to be your root file system. and have it resized?
Yes, a lot of cases actually. But,
Really?
well, yeah, I mean, if you're going to provision more space, it's firstly for application or user data, then, you know, I don't know. In
But
practice,
this is a
it's
partition
right.
that you get. I mean, it's the partition volume.
It's the root partition.
Yeah,
So you have
it's
your
the
whole
root partition.
gig system and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, but then, I mean, like, if you say, so I'm saying if you boot with your root volume being
Yep.
15 gig, or 15 gig rather than 10,
Yeah.
why would you ever not want your root file system to take up that whole 15 gig? You can attach other,
Absolutely, yeah. In a cloud situation, no, you're right. You will want anyway the root file system to occupy all that, yes.
so would there be any reason why you wouldn't resize E2FS, just call resize E2FS on boot?
Good work.
And then you will always have whatever you provisioned.
That will be a way to do it dynamically. So we can read. Can we know the storage before though? Can we know the size of the storage before that?
It's pretty impressive. Resize E2FS, you don't even pass in arguments, and it just says, oh, well, the volume is this big, and it just does it.
Fantastic. Great stuff.
Okay.
I think we're
Okay, we can go to lunch.
And so for
Is it
more
lunchtime
interested,
already?
there is a session on Friday morning on cloud unit and cloud config stuff, which will continue this week.
Friday
Yeah.
morning, yeah.
Friday night.